Hello, vinyl community. Mike from My Guitar Player 07 here, coming at you live with another vinyl record video with a movie tag video for you guys today. So this is a real short and simple one, and I just wanted to do my response. So hope you guys enjoy, and here we go. So the first question is, what is the very first soundtrack you bought? Now I could have went with the very first soundtrack I ever owned, but I was gifted it. The very first one I remember buying with my own money would be the soundtrack to Michael Jackson's This Is It. Back when this came out. This is a single disc version. I know there's a 2-disc version out there, but unfortunately I only have the single disc version. But yeah, this is from this documentary of This Is It, of what would have been Michael Jackson's final tour. And yeah, the only really new stuff that hasn't been released on previous releases of Michael Jackson's work, or the Jacksons or Jackson 5 stuff, would be the song This Is It and the orchestral version of that. As I said, the 2-disc version might have had more, but that's what I'm aware of from the version I own. The second question is the newest soundtrack in your collection, and I could have answered this one of two ways. I could have answered it with the literal newest one I own and have purchased, or based on the soundtrack and movie release date. And I went based on the movie release date because my newest of the new that I've received or purchased, I wanted to use for another question. So the newest soundtrack based on release date would be the soundtrack to Bohemian Rhapsody. This is, I believe, the Target version, if I'm not mistaken. We know what this looks like. Has a nice band shot of everybody in the back. And it's very interesting that this has a photo of I believe it's a photo of actual Freddie Mercury instead of Rami, but. And then this has a nice poster, which I believe was only included in the Target exclusive, but either way, has that nice poster. And I bought this and the DVD, I think, the same day, if I'm not mistaken. And it's great because it has the Wembley live stuff, which I really think is cool from Live Aid. Question 3, the most listened to soundtrack. I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I guess you guys are not going to be surprised. And I just went with non-orchestral stuff for this question. So the most listened to soundtrack with lyrics would be South Park's Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. But not on vinyl record. It was one of the few full-length albums I ever purchased on iTunes, and I listened to this on my iPod and iPhone all the time in high school and beginning of college too. And then Record Store Day came around. I couldn't get this, but then I got hooked up with it from my boy Chris from the Man Cave. He hooked me up with this for a good price. Now I have this. I've only listened to the vinyl record version once so far, but I might be listening to this again tonight. Good stuff. If you're easily offended by stupid humor, well then don't, but check it out. But all right. So the next question would be your favorite composer, and this was kind of hard. Because I love John Williams, I love Hans Zimmer, I love John Carpenter, and I also love Charlie Chowser. And all of those names are probably familiar for most people except for Charlie Chowser, but Charlie Chowser did this scores for the Saw movies, for everybody's reference. John Williams is Superman, Star Wars, Chariots of Fire, E.T., Hans Zimmer, Pirates of the Caribbean is the only thing that's coming to mind from the top of my head, but also it's just because I just saw that movie. And then John Carpenter, you got Christine, Halloween, The Fog, just to name a few. So, for this, I just decided to pull out, I have the most of John Williams soundtracks on physical format, or really any format. John Williams I have the most of, so I decided to choose John Williams, and I decided to pull out the Star Wars soundtrack. Is this John Williams' best score? I'm not sure, because I have not heard everything that he's ever done. But it is most certainly a good one. All right, favorite composer, favorite score. Yeah, my favorite score, this was kind of difficult, but I decided to go with the one that is the most unique to me based on the franchise and the one I enjoy the most from the franchise, even though I enjoy them all from this franchise, at least of the first 3 movies, because that's all I've seen and the only soundtracks I've heard. But I decided to go with, let me pull this out of the sleeve, I decided to go with Halloween 3 for my favorite score. This is a special Mondo edition that came out. Death Waltz version, but I want to get the original version one day on vinyl record and CD. The CD version should be coming soon because I just recently ordered it. The vinyl record version, well, we all know how hard the Halloween soundtracks are to find on vinyl records, so originals at least. So this is the one that I have, and this is actually different from the original score because this has like every version of the I'm drawing a blank. Silver Shamrock, that's right. The Silver Shamrock TV commercial. This version has every version of that sound of the because in the movie it has the various commercials for the countdowns, this many days until Halloween, that whole thing. Well, on the original release, it only had the one version of it, and it didn't even mention the countdown. It was just the generic version of it. So, I mean, the Silver Shamrock theme is a little bit of a guilty pleasure, I guess, even though I don't really believe in guilty pleasures, but if it was to be a guilty pleasure, that would be one. I've listened to that an unhealthy amount in my life. So, all right, next. A good movie with a bad soundtrack. Now, this soundtrack I don't own, but I do own the movie. So, the movie's good, even though it's not the better of the two movies in the franchise, but it's still a good movie, and it would be Ghostbusters 2. Compared to the soundtrack to the first Ghostbusters, this one kind of blows chunks. They're both good, but if I had to choose a movie that is a good movie but poor score or soundtrack, Ghostbusters 2 would be my choice. Okay, a soundtrack that's better than the movie. This was fairly easy for me to choose. Footloose. I've only seen this movie twice, heard the soundtrack numerous times, but the movie, it's fine, but the soundtrack is a lot better. The other movies that are in this realm of like Grease and Breakfast Club and there's another one I'm drawing a blank with at the moment, one or two, but anyway, the movies and the soundtrack are great. This one, the soundtrack is great, but the movie kind of lacks for me. So, but of course that's just my opinion, but you know, let's hear it for the boy Footloose, Almost Paradise, Holding Out for a Hero. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of those songs. I know I'm going to get some shit for that one, but oh well. Favorite band on a soundtrack? Well, everybody knows my three favorite bands are Led Zeppelin, Dream Theater, and the Beatles. Well, the Beatles, well, we all know how the Beatles are when it comes to being in soundtracks. Dream Theater is not known enough to be in any soundtrack, so I had to go with Led Zeppelin. Now, I don't know anything about the Dazed and Confused soundtrack. I've never seen it, never listened to the soundtrack. I'm sure Zeppelin is featured in that. I'm sure their song Dazed and Confused is in it. However, I wouldn't know because I don't own a soundtrack, never seen a movie. So I decided to go with Led Zeppelin's The Song Remains the Same, which is a concert documentary of their works. And, well, it's them performing, so it doesn't get any more than that. I have some beef with this soundtrack because some of the stuff that's in the movie is not on here. Some of the stuff that's on here is not in the movie. But, you know, it's still fine. Of the live albums that Zeppelin has, even though this is kind of a soundtrack-live album, of the soundtrack stuff, -live stuff, this is the worst, in my opinion, of Zeppelin's discography. But that's just me. The second to last question is a soundtrack that I feel that should be in everybody's collection. Vince Guaraldi's Trio, the soundtrack to A Charlie Brown Christmas. This should be in everybody's collection. I guess unless you're Jewish or you don't celebrate Christmas or you don't like this kind of music, then I understand. But I think that this is an essential soundtrack in general. Everybody goes to stuff like Star Wars, The Breakfast Club, and all that, and I don't disagree. But Charlie Brown, I mean, you can't go wrong. And I was so ecstatic when Tavis from Final Talk with Tavis VCLT'd me this year because this was one of my biggest Christmas Grail soundtracks, one of the two. So thank you for that, Tavis. And you know what's nice about this one's easily able to be pulled out. This one's on a nice translucent green, so it's cool. And the Halloween has some colored records too, but that's a whole packaging that I would have to pull out. All right, final question. Some Grail soundtracks. Everything I don't have. No, I'm kidding. So the Saw anthologies that Charlie Trouser did, they were all released like when they first came out. Both was the score versions and the music inspired by. But I would love to have the Saw anthologies. I have the music inspired by soundtracks for Saw 1 and 2 on CD, but I want the anthology on vinyl record, both 1 and 2. I don't know if they ever made a CD version of that, but if that's on CD too, I want that on vinyl record and CD. That'd be fantastic. As I hinted at when I was showing the Halloween 3 soundtrack, the Halloween soundtracks, at least the first 3 original pressings, those are some high up grails on my list. Beth over at B-Side Records just got an original pressing of the first Halloween soundtrack. I couldn't be happier for her. It's fantastic. Also, Chris has the Spins. Chris also has an original pressing of that soundtrack. You guys are lucky SOBs. But anyway, the Nightmare on Elm Street soundtrack, at least the first movie, I would love to have that soundtrack on vinyl record and original pressing, even though they have that very nice box set that was released within the past year or two that is still in print, if I'm not mistaken, or at least still readily available on Amazon and all that. I'd like to get that box set and the original press soundtrack. And it would also be cool to get the 12-inch single of the Nightmare on Elm Street 3's Dream Warriors that Dokken did. The original soundtrack for Friday the 13th, I don't know if those were ever released on vinyl record back in the day, but I know that their original soundtracks are available on CD. I have the first one by Henry Manfredini, and the soundtrack to... And then all the soundtracks have been reissued by Waxwork Records recently. I'm not sure if they have original versions of those, but if they do, I would most certainly like to have those on top of the Mondo or Waxwork releases. And then really the only other one that came to mind, rather than like generic stuff like Breakfast Club and all that stuff, which are fairly readily available. The other more obscure one and more difficult one to find would be the Home Alone soundtrack. That's a soundtrack that came in the 90s, so it wasn't really on vinyl record for an original pressing, at least to my knowledge. I have your CD soundtrack, but Mondo a couple years ago did a red and green for a double LP set of that I heard of the day they sold out, because I saw an ad for it on social media, went to go buy it, and they said that, and they were advertising it like a couple hours prior, and they had sold out and a couple hours later by the time I had wanted it. So that's one that I almost got my hands on, but didn't. All the other ones I haven't. But yeah, so the Nightmare, Nightmare, I want that too, but the Home Alone soundtrack, probably my biggest Christmas movie grail. So thank you guys for watching my movie tag. I'm hoping that you guys enjoyed. Keep on spinning that wax, and I will see you in the next vinyl record video.